My name is Conor. I'm the founder of Alchemy Search. We're a finance and tax recruitment business. We've been in the region for nearly 4 years, and we focus on junior level, mid-level, and senior hires. What makes us different is that I guess my background is I'm an ex-accountant, and so is 4 or 5 of my team also. So look, we're trying to help as many people. I guess the reality in this market today is that there's a lot more candidates than jobs. So, we've got a nice, small enough group here today. So hopefully we can get through as many of your questions. And don't be afraid of any question. It's a small forum here, and what happens in the conversation should stay in the conversation. So, any questions you want to ask, which maybe you've been unsure to ask in other forums, that I'm happy to answer everything, hopefully. And we'll make it as interactive as possible. I'll work through the slides, and then all your questions at the end. I've got a free morning, so we'll get through as many as possible, if not all. So next slide. So part 1, so how hiring in finance has changed. So if you go to the next. Yeah, so I think, look, I've been in the region for coming on 8 years now, and traditional hiring definitely has changed quite a lot. As you'll probably notice now, that there's a lot more LinkedIn hiring, so direct hires. Then there still is agencies. If there wasn't, then I'd be looking for a job myself. But I think just a few things to be aware of, that when you see adverts on LinkedIn, and I imagine this happens quite a lot sometimes with a recruiter and the company, is that, for example, if you apply directly to a company, us as the recruiter, we actually are not able then to assist you in the process, because the company would actually have ownership of your CV. Because sometimes we get a role and then we reach out to candidates and they say that we've already sent through our CV for the role. Then unfortunately, from a recruiter's perspective, we're unable to help you. And the challenge then for the hiring company is that we know that there's a lot of good candidates that have applied directly. However, HR or the TA team do not have time to actually get through the thousands of applications. So a little tip I would say is that if you have a good relationship with a recruiter, before applying directly to a role, screenshot the vacancy and send it to the recruiter on WhatsApp and just say, do you have any connections there? Because in UAE in particular, it is all about skipping the queue from a hiring perspective. Any role that you see advertised today, if you go back to the same role tomorrow, it probably has 500 to 1,000 applicants. So it's just a very, very saturated market. So then the second point, to the importance of the digital and tech savvy candidates. So for me, if I was a candidate, I think I'd struggle, because as the team here at Alan found out before this call, that I'm definitely not a very tech savvy person. So I think honing on those skills is so important these days, because the people of my generation and the people above me, I think we're not as tech savvy as a lot of the new Gen Z up and coming talent, because the reality of these days with companies, with UE, is that everything looks pretty on the outside. It's when you go inside the companies, you see that there's a lot of challenges, and to put it politely, they're quite messy sometimes. So I think having that skill set, being comfortable with systems. One thing I notice in finance in the UAE is that every company wants to do like a new ERP implementation. So having those skills, like for example, we're working with one big organization at the moment, and if you don't have SAP implementation skills, then you won't get the role. So having those skills is very important. And shifting from technical skills to strategic, it is all about value add. In the world of AI now, from a finance perspective, there's obviously going to be some lower level jobs that maybe are potentially under threat in the coming future. So I think if people can, the way AI is going, technically, a lot of those IFRS things will be dealt with at some point, where it is all about the subjective skills influencing commercial skills, where they are a lot more in demand, I think, at the moment. So just next, please. So what are CFOs looking for? There may or may not be some CFOs on this call, so maybe that they might be able to answer. They can call me out if I'm getting it wrong. But what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of companies looking for FP&A, commercial analysis, and just a lot more forward-looking skill sets. The reality is for us, when we get a role, if we get a financial controller role, we have so many candidates. If it's very much a controllership-led role, we have way, way more candidates than the jobs. While if it is more of a analyst or commercially driven role, it's harder for us to get that right talent. And recently, I've been interviewing a few CFOs on our podcast, and the big thing I've picked up from it is that their view with AI for the most part is that it's just going to make things a bit quicker. It's going to be like a very good crutch for people within finance functions. That task that might have taken them half a day or 5 hours may now take only 10, 15 minutes. So, from the CFO's perspective, I think what skills that they're looking for is managerial skills, leadership skills, because if you think about it, if you've got more time in the day, it is going to be about managing the team, motivating the team. And that's probably where I foresee the biggest challenge, maybe the next 5 or 10 years, where a lot of the newer, younger talent doesn't really see the value of being in an office and building relationships with the teams in the office. Where if somebody just wants to work remotely 4 days a week, it's going to be very hard to influence the senior stakeholders within the business to promote you down the line. So I think that's one really big issue, which is a big red flag when we speak with candidates. And I fully appreciate sometimes there will be a need to have a hybrid work environment, especially for busy mothers, etc., that need to do school runs and pickups. But I do think there has to be a happy medium from a hybrid point of view. So for the sort of younger listeners in the audience, there is a lot of value of being in the office, learning from who's in charge of you, and just eavesdropping on conversations and meetings. So next slide, please.
Okay, everybody. So I'm going to take a poll live. I would really appreciate if you could share your thoughts after this. You can go to the polls option and put up your answer.
So yeah, I guess the $1 million question, which we get from candidates across all levels, is you're telling me that there's no jobs really, there's too many candidates. So how am I going to stand out in the candidates? So yeah, I think the big thing is, and this is just sharing some insights from someone who sits on this side of the desk. I get emails every day, LinkedIn messages every hour from candidates across the world. And my advice is firstly, keep the emails relatively short. I don't know how many times I see emails where you can clearly tell it's just a big copy and paste. The fonts are different. Sometimes they spell my name wrong, little things like this. And you can just tell automatically that this is just a mass email that people are saying. And even if someone just doesn't even address my name, recruiters just automatically don't take the email seriously. So I think that would be just a tip. I'd say make sure you address the person you're emailing, make sure your font is correct. And, like anything, you don't need to send 5 or 6, 7 paragraphs in an initial email to a recruiter or a hiring manager, because if I'm being honest, nobody reads through all these things. And it's the same with your CV, that less is more. And even for senior people, some CFOs I know that their page is 2 pages, 3 pages max. Because someone who's at the senior end of the market, nobody's that interested in a detailed summary of what you did 20 years ago. Just put the name of the companies, the areas. Don't get caught up spending lengthy time sharing that information. And then, that's just one thing I would say. Standing out with a recruiter, if you can get in front of a recruiter, that's where you can really build a relationship. And I fully appreciate someone will say, well, recruiters don't have time to meet me. And I think there's probably an element to that, because in this market now, our job is actually trying to get the jobs on. Once we have the jobs on, then of course we can reach out to candidates. But when we have candidates saying, "Can you meet me today? Can you jump on a quick call?" If I committed to all of that, I would get no work done every day. Is the honest reality. So just to give a bit of context, if someone doesn't get back to you, I think if people get back to me, I'll always get back to them. But I guess the thing, the closing point around standing out in this market is that, and I want this to come across in a in a fair way, is that given we are in such a multicultural society here in the UAE, is that some candidates will be right for some companies, but they won't be right for other companies, and that's just the honest reality. I could have a superb candidate from, I don't know, the UK, who will be perfect for this company, but they won't be perfect for another company for the exact same position. So I think the big thing I'd say, especially for good candidates, is not to beat yourself up that if you didn't get a job or didn't get to second round, because unfortunately, the market that we are in, there are other factors at play which may help or not help you. So again, that's just being honest from that side of things. So next slide, please. So I think there's a few key ones here. Soft skills do matter. The reality is anybody can write a good CV, and especially in a time when we've got ChatGPT, people can make themselves look a lot better than they actually are. And when they get to interview stage, it is all about the soft skills. I'm assuming obviously predominantly finance people on the call here today. If you take a step back and look at an interview, especially junior mid-level roles, all it is a conversation for maybe 45 minutes with somebody sat in front of you. So you're not being tested on your Excel, you're not being tested on anything. You're really being tested on your communication, your soft skills. So for me, that's so important. Obviously, your CV will get you to the door, but you yourself and personality will get you, through the door from that end. So what I would always say, especially for people who are out of work, who are unfortunately immediately available and looking for their next role, just go and interview as much as possible. Be selfish, because the more you interview, the more confident you're going to get. The more confidence you get, the better you're going to come across to an interviewer. So I see sometimes a lot of wrong mistakes by especially candidates who are new to the market coming in, or someone who's lost the role, say, "Oh, I'm not interested in that job, but that's not of interest to me." But you need to be selfish, because there's some roles out here which the company looks great, and you go in and you do not like the hiring manager. And then there's going to be other jobs where the company doesn't look interesting, but you go in and you meet the hiring manager and you click. So again, it's just to give yourself as much exposure. And that's a big thing I think people miss out here, is that just go and interview, because it will just increase your confidence. It's all the same questions for the most part. So that's just a big tip, I would say, from that end. And next slide.
Okay, everybody. So I'm gonna be publishing another poll.
We're getting through in good time. There'll be lots of times for lots of questions, guys, now afterwards. So the hiring process. So I guess how decisions are made. One thing I would say for job seekers is that as a recruiter, we are the middle person. And decisions in this country sometimes are very slow, they're very drawn out, and getting feedback can be very difficult. So I know sometimes people like to point the finger at the recruiter for not giving feedback, but a lot of the time the client actually hasn't given us feedback on the situation. But it is very, very challenging here in this market, because someone makes a decision and then their boss doesn't approve the decision, and then hiring processes are just so slow and so painful. So I know this probably resonates with people, especially in this market, where you go through a process and you just don't hear anything back. So again, I can give as much advice on how to, counter these sort of situations. But I guess, yeah, so how decisions are made. So CFO priorities. So look, for CFOs, when you're interviewing, have a look at the CFO's profile on LinkedIn. Like, this is a small thing which I think a lot of people miss. If you can see some common ground between you and the CFO, if you follow them on LinkedIn, small things matter. I'm obviously getting more senior in my career, but I'm realizing that CFOs or senior people, they're the same people as us. Younger generation, where if you can work out some common ground, for example, if you see they're big into cricket, little things like this will really warm up the conversation. I remember I was speaking at a fireside chat, and there was an Indian head of tax, and he was crazy for cricket. And like he'd openly say, if someone came into an interview and started talking about cricket, he will just go off in the conversation, and it just gets some common ground for that. So I think sometimes people try to be too formal in interviews, where if you can get some common ground with someone, even if they're from roughly the same part of the world or anything, don't be afraid to leverage those things, because it's going to make you more comfortable in the situation and put you at ease if there is a bit of a nice icebreaker for a conversation. And then with regards skills, qualifications, okay, look, in this world, qualifications, of course, are important. For candidates with a CA, ACCA, CIMA, that just proves to the employer that you should have a good idea of what you're doing. Candidates without qualifications, it does make things a lot more difficult, if I'm honest, because clients will say, well, we need someone with a qualification. While in other parts of the world, it's not, I guess, as enforced, but definitely in this market, companies want comfort around that. But then, the big thing I would say now is, it really, as I said earlier on, is being solid with ERP, Microsoft Dynamics, SAP, any implementation work. That is such a hot commodity these days. So if that's not in your CV, make sure you're using your CV to, in theory, boast about yourself, because if you don't do it, nobody will do it. And then, with the decision process, you just need to keep at the recruiter. I'll openly tell you, as a recruiter, our job is to pester people on a daily basis. So, don't be afraid to chase for feedback. Don't do it, of course, 1 hour or 2 hours, but, get a commitment from the recruiter when you should, get an update, and then feel free, to keep chasing, because I know personally it's a horrible position when you're just sort of left in limbo, unsure of where things are at. So next slide.
Okay, so this is the last poll for this session, and it has been published. Please let us know what you think is the most challenging part of the hiring process. Connor, meanwhile, everyone's voting. I think we should go through what they thought about the other polls.
Yep.
Okay. So, which of the following do you think is the most important trait CFOs look for when hiring? And majority of them voted leadership skills. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, I think, as I was saying earlier on, with AI, I think leadership and managerial skills are going to be so important these days, because the big challenge we have is that we've certain generations who, nobody phone calls anyone these days. Everything is WhatsApp. Everything is people are afraid to actually have conversations sometimes, where I think if you are comfortable having phone calls, having face-to-face meetings, that's going to get you quite ahead of the chasing pack, because times have changed so much since 10, 15 years ago, where people just pick up a phone and call somebody. Now you need to message them and see if they're free to speak. We're a very closed off society these days compared to where we used to be, and I think that's, for someone who's up and coming, the more that you can be comfortable having conversations and then having difficult conversations, that's how you're really going to stand out. And with the leadership point of view, the big thing you hear now is emotional intelligence, and that's becoming more and more to the front because in this day and age, there's so much about mental health, people suffering. It's really is to the forefront of any agenda. And people who are bullies or, very passive aggressive, now there are HRs in place to deal with these people. And if companies want to retain the best talent, they need to probably be a bit nicer to their employees. Where I think back in the day, companies were, and some look, unfortunately, some still are, but now people are like, you know what, I'll just go and work somewhere else. And we've seen many candidates who actually just resign and say, look, I'm going to work somewhere else. I don't need this in my life. So yeah, leadership for me is definitely the most important thing because people want to hire people that are going to go up the ladder. And yeah, because I just think the way finance is going, AI is going to take over certain aspects, which is maybe very back office. So that skill set of having social skills, soft skills, I think that stock is going to keep rising.
Absolutely agreed, Connor. So, for the next question, what do you think makes a candidate truly memorable during the hiring process? And everyone voted, majority people voted, sorry, that a compelling personal story or experiences. I think this sort of solidifies what you said.
Yeah. So I think, look, yeah, attitude will always beat everything. For me, when we hire, look, recruitment's a lot more, I think, simpler. It's not as complex as working in finance. But for me, attitude, I guess the saying goes, hard work beats talent that doesn't work hard. So I think that crossovers for anything in finance. If you can see someone who is, green, has the right attitude and wants to learn, of course they're going to be better than someone who knows it all but they're lazy. I think that's a big challenge in this market because you've got so many different cultures. How business is done, how work is done is very different. And for you to be able to mold a team with different cultures, different backgrounds, like for me, that's the big plus. And yeah, look, a compelling personal story, you want to see enthusiasm because again, what candidates forget is that the hiring manager, whoever they are, you're not the only person they're speaking with. They probably had to have 5, 10 interviews, and some of them can be very boring. They just zone out, and they've made the decision quite quickly that this isn't the right person. But if you can actually interact with them, tell them a story, show them your passion. But then the point to close with here is that a memorable candidate is a candidate that asks you questions because otherwise it's just them talking, you saying yes, yes, you ask another generic question, talk. While if the candidate puts the question back on them, they're naturally going to be more engaged in the conversation. So again, this goes back to the point of doing your homework on the hiring manager. If you see he or she has been with the company 10 years, you say, well, why have you been here so long? What's made you stay so long? Or if you've been working only a couple of years, how does this compare to the previous company? And again, you're not being rude by asking them these questions, but it's going to get them more mentally stimulated because trust me, some guys are doing 4 interviews back to back, and you can imagine by the 3rd or the 4th interview that they've just already checked out and they need to be engaged. So hopefully that helps.
That's very helpful. I mean, I personally have learned so much from this so far.
Good.
So, moving on to the last question that we asked. What do you think is the most challenging part of the hiring process? And majority of the people voted, Connor, that answering unexpected or tricky questions. So I wanted to ask you, does it matter what people say or how they say it, and what exactly are they being judged on when a tricky question is asked?
So a tricky question is actually a good thing because it means for the most part you've probably raised the antennas of the hiring manager. What we see in recruitment, and this is you may or may not believe this, but if we have a candidate that calls us after the interview, after like 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and they say, I've done excellent, I've smashed the interview, we know they're not getting the job. Um, because the interviewer has decided early that this isn't the right person. Let's just get through this interview, be nice, and move them on. Well, when we have candidates that say, "Oh, I don't know, I'm not sure, it was a really tough interview. I think I tried my best," they're usually the candidates that get offered the job. Um, because usually these candidates, they'll have prepared quite a lot, prepared very heavily, and we know they're good candidates, and they've come out of the thing a little bit unsure, and then the client will ring us and say, "Excellent candidate, let's move them forward." Well, there is sometimes an element where the hiring manager will purposely be difficult to see how you react under pressure. So for the most part, take it as a compliment if you do get pushed, because the hiring manager sees something in you, and depending on the role or the level, they want to see how you deal with difficult people. Because a lot of companies here, especially mid to senior roles, you're going to be exposed to some senior stakeholders who naturally may be a bit of a pain, to put it nicely. So they want to make sure that you can deal with that. That's okay.
That is something I definitely didn't know. So I hope this helps our audience. Okay, so Connor, another thing I noticed in our polls, the second most voted option was negotiating the offer and benefits is one of the most challenging parts. What, how do you think they should approach this? What would you advise on this?
Yeah, so this is probably the most difficult part of any process, because the nature of this market here. A lot of companies, unfortunately, will lowball candidates. So I can appreciate there's probably people who have experienced this, and this is usually for candidates that are out of work, immediately available. That unfortunately they get taken advantage of, and obviously the recruiter, we're naturally annoyed because our fee is based on the offer. So if we go through a whole process, we make it clear the candidate's expectations. Let's just say the candidate wants 20 and then it comes to offer, they offer 15. And because the candidate is out of work, sometimes unfortunately they have to accept these offers. The reality is for the hiring company is that this person will leave in 6 to 12 months once they get a good offer. So it's a very short-term view, I would say. And it's very frustrating. But then candidates who are in jobs, naturally, if they're on 20K, if they get offered 20K, unless they really, really don't like their work, they're gonna, stay where they are. So to answer how to negotiate, if you're dealing directly, if you've got no recruiter involved, of course I'm going to say this, but it is a bit harder, because you've got nobody fighting your corner. While for us, once you have a recruiter involved, provided that you're being fair, of course we're going to fight for you. But the challenge can sometimes be is that if a candidate goes through a process and says, "I want 20, 20, 20," and then they get an offer at 20, and then they say, "No, I want 23 now," and this happens quite a lot, in this market. There, it's a lot more difficult, and obviously as the recruiter, we're sort of put in a difficult position where the client's been very clear about the budget, and it just seems that at the last minute the candidate's chancing their arm. So I guess as the recruiter, we are in the middle, so we see good and bad from both sides. But I would always stick on the candidate side for the most part, because we can see it's quite black and white. If someone's being fair and reasonable, there's no hiding it. You can see. So to give comfort, Alchemy anyway will always do our best to help the candidates. As I say, the more you get, the more we get, but it needs to be fair to both parties. It's okay.
Okay, perfect. Let's move forward to the last part, and then it's going to be Q&A. This is going to be short. Inside the hiring room, real stories of candidates who made it and the ones who didn't.
Yeah, so I think probably just touching on what we just mentioned there is that, I've seen, unfortunately, we'll start with clients. We've had clients who lowballed candidates, who have made an offer to a candidate, and then the candidate has accepted the offer, resigned from their company, is due to start 2 weeks, and then they get a call saying, "Oh, we're not going forward with your application." So it is really bad, some of the stories that have happened here, but I don't want to make this a very negative webinar. I want to spin positivity because we don't want to be all doom and gloom. But yeah, I think, look, from candidates, we've had times where candidates have said they wanted 20, got them 20, then they wanted 22, 23, and the client will just go with another candidate. Sometimes we usually work exclusive with clients, so we can see exactly which candidate are in play. And for us, if the candidate messes the client around, messes us around, and we have another candidate that is chomping at the bit to take the offer, we're obviously going to push the other candidate. And that's just being very honest with the listeners. So I guess the point is not to be too greedy in any situation, because otherwise you will get blacklisted from agencies. We've had a few candidates where we would never touch them again, because they were just using us. Sometimes they were using us to get counter offers. So they go through a whole process, then they get an offer, they go to their boss, knowing that all they want is that offer to be matched, and then they'll stay where they are. And then usually in 6-9 months, they ring us saying, "Can I move now?" And our hands have already been burnt by this person. And look, it depends. Sometimes it is genuine, but we've also noted that there is a lot of candidates that will use a hiring process just to get an offer. So my advice would be is don't go through the whole charade of going through interviews, everything. Just speak with your boss and just say, "Look, I'm looking for a raise," and see what they say. Because what candidates forget is that the hiring company or the boss, your boss, will always remember that you went behind their back to interview elsewhere and then stayed with them. So when times are bad and there's restructuring going on, then unfortunately these guys are probably in the firing line from the CEO or the CFO, etc. So yeah, I guess they'd be the sort of main things I'd be pushing on, is that just don't be afraid to ask for something, especially before going through a whole interview process, because it can just damage your reputation, especially in Dubai, where it is actually very small. We know a lot of our candidates quite well. So yeah, it's building the relationships, keeping in touch with people, and then building a strong social brand on LinkedIn is always going to help. So I hope that gives a good overview of what we're looking for. And I'm ready to take as many questions as we can fit in. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Connor. Now we will move on to the Q&A session. Please feel free to ask any question. You can drop your questions in the question tab or chat. You can see an icon with a question mark, and we're just going to wait for a couple of minutes. Okay, let's move on to the next question. What if we want to take a job because of good culture fit but low salary? I think we've already addressed this. What type of roles or industries are currently seeing the most demand in UAE, especially for UK candidates?
Okay, so roles, mid-level roles. So finance manager, finance controller, FP&A manager, I would say are the sweet spot. Then you get a lot of senior accountant roles, which would be for usually newly qualified talent. So the newly qualified guys would be senior accountants. Then your couple of years post industry would be finance manager, then finance controller. So finance director and CFO. For us as a business, we get a few, but I would say our sweet spot is that mid-level space. And the reality is, the more senior you go, the more demand they put on having UA experience. So, and to be clear, in as nice a manner, UA experience, it really means being able to deal with chaos. Because in the UK or other parts of the world, the finance functions, for the most part, are probably a lot more stable. While here, the teams are a lot leaner. So, you'll have candidates coming from more mature markets that they say, I just want to be FP&A. The reality is here, a lot of roles are a hybrid of FP&A and controllership. So it's just a point to be aware, especially for more mature markets, that if an FC role may have FP&A within it. So it's not too often where you'll have a pure controllership function and a pure FP&A function. And that's our most volume of work will be mid-level roles. So, and then, industry wise. So for us, the business, we recruit everything that's not a bank. So I would say that the hot industries at the moment would be real estate, construction, oil and gas, luxury retail. Fintech was very, very busy last year. So yeah, they'd be the sort of main industries at the moment.
Okay, perfect. Okay, next question is, how do you navigate the salary expectations when the job doesn't ordinarily show a salary range? You might price yourself out of the role through no fault of your own. For example, I have been made aware of that head roles range between 25 to 50,000.
Okay, so that's, I guess, yeah, that's the joy of having a recruiter, is that we can get a good insight of what the budget for the roles are and the expectations. So if we have the briefing call with the candidate, we can work out where they are positioned in the market. So head of roles, how I would see the market currently, if we go through the levels generically. So senior accountants can be anywhere from 15 to 18K, sometimes 20K. Then the next level up from that will be a finance manager, which can sometimes be 18, but can go up as high as 25 to 28K. Controllers, financial controllers, can be anything from 25 to 35. And again, I'm being very broad here just because clearly it depends on the size of the business. If you're a financial controller for a business of 300 people, is very different than a financial controller of a business of 20 people. So I'm trying to be quite broad. I would say head of finance roles are 35 to 45, depending, again, what level and also what industry. So, of course, there's certain industries which pay better than other industries. So at the moment, obviously, the last couple of years, oil and gas has naturally been booming. It's obviously slowing down a bit now, but these industries have a bit more money, so they can get the best talent. The same for like law firms, etc. So yeah, heads of finance can be anything up to 45, 50. And then I guess FDs, 50 to 70. And then CFOs can be anything from 70 to 120. But sometimes you will see CFOs on 40K. And the reality is that that's not a CFO. And it's probably a finance lead for a very small business. So
Okay.
hopefully that helps.
Okay, perfect. Let's move on. We have a couple of questions left.
Yep.
With only 5 minutes to go, let's go over this. What can we do to connect with a recruiter and be heard? What should be the approach, as LinkedIn messages does not seem to work? And I think there is a following question as well, which we can address here. Recruiters are not very keen in connecting with overseas candidates, which makes things very difficult. And how do a potential candidate navigate this? So I think we can answer both together.
Good questions. I'm in the firing line. I hope people. Look, for us, I try very much to reply to everyone, but the reality is it's so hard to keep on top of everyone. And the viewpoint that recruiters would take is that if you're not here, why should we engage? And of course, I fully appreciate that's quite rude. But the reality is we've so many people that are actually on the ground who are here that they have to be our focus. Like what I try to do is, if people WhatsApp me, we have 2 LinkedIn articles and also a podcast, which actually answers so much of the questions. So, on the back of this call today, if someone wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn or on WhatsApp, I can share with you a lot of our information, which actually answers questions on Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and also our podcast. Because for us, it's the same questions over and over again, where we have these both forms that can probably answer a lot of that. But yeah, look, I know some recruiters are good, some are bad. I can't speak on behalf of everyone, But it is, look, it's just a very tough market, because there is so many more candidates than jobs that unfortunately some recruiters will look at it from a very short-term approach and just focus on that. And look, I appreciate I sometimes miss people, but it's not from a bad place. It is just more being a LinkedIn inbox that is overwhelmed. So hopefully that answers.
That's true. Okay, so we have two questions left. Hi, Connor. How is job market in Dubai for senior finance professionals, 10 plus years of experience trying to secure a role in Dubai, overseas candidate? What should they expect? And I think we have a following question in our chat box too. Would age still matter if you have great experience backing you up?
So, okay, thanks for the question. So, yeah, I think, look, for senior finance people, it is a bit harder, just because in Dubai, and I mean this in a nice way, common sense is not very common, in a lot of hiring processes, where if you do not tick the box of what HR want, they'll automatically say no. So, for example, they will say they need UE experience. So that completely just wipes off everybody who's not in the region. And it's very hard. And for us, sometimes I can speak to candidates who are excellent overseas candidates, and I know they're excellent. They've got great experience. I've had a call with them, or maybe I've met them. But unfortunately, we don't pay the bill. The hiring company does. And because there's such an oversupply of talent, they can mostly get what they want, in this market. Like, it's not like we're recruiting in the middle of nowhere and in Saudi Arabia or something like that, where getting talent is hard. The reality now for the UAE, it's created a brand where people will come, from that end. So, yeah, I guess to answer the question, it is hard, because companies will always say, before we reach out to any overseas candidates, who do we have on the ground? And 9 times out of 10, they're probably usually able to find that talent on the ground. So, unfortunately, that's where the challenge is, I think, for the overseas candidates.
Agreed. Um, okay, this would be our last question. It will be great if you can please tell how Alchemy can support virtual CFO. And then there's another question. If you're joining from SEA region, does the previous salary matter?
Okay, so yeah, so look, on the virtual CFO piece, it's not something that we're currently supporting. If I'm being honest, we're trying to set up a fractional CFO wing, and of course, if clients say, "Do you have any virtual people?" then that would be an area we would look into. But for the moment, we're probably more focused on the fractional side of things. So, but I'm of course happy to connect, post the call, whoever asked that question. And then if you are joining from the SEA region, does the previous no, the previous salary doesn't matter, is the honest answer, because of course the cost of living is going to be completely different, in different parts of the world. How you should be judging yourself is where you're positioned in the market, what level, what years of experience. They're probably the key points that people would look for. And then I think, just to close on this as well, for people coming into the region, is don't get so hell-bent on job title. My advice for anyone coming into the region is to make a sideways move, to get yourself settled in the region, settled into the role. Because sometimes if you come in with a big jump and then you sit down in your office and you realize that there's lots of problems, lots of chaos, it's not as stable as you maybe would be used to, because there's a employment law is not as strong here. You could find yourself out of job quite quickly. So, yeah, enjoy your first year, get settled into a nice role, and then your second move should be the career move, in my opinion.
Interesting. Thank you, Connor. And with this, our last question. Does LinkedIn Premium help for a job search?
I wouldn't be spending big money on it. I think if you can get it free for a trial, there's no harm in using it. But yeah, look, with LinkedIn, creating a LinkedIn brand, engaging with posts from recruiters or hiring managers, connecting, they're the key things. So I'm not going to say wasting money, but I wouldn't be, I don't think it would make a massive difference, if I'm honest.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you so much, Connor. I think we have addressed all of the questions, both from questions and chat box. Uh, Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, everyone. We hope that this session was truly helpful for your career advances and any questions that you had. Please leave a feedback for us. And thank you so much, Connor, for taking out the time.
Yeah, thank you guys. And as I said, if anyone hasn't connected with me on LinkedIn, feel free to connect. Just mention that we've had this call, because then I can identify who's been in touch. And thank you for taking time out. And yeah, looking forward to being connected.
Okay.